In 1943, inside a Nazi military hospital, a Polish nurse discovered a flaw so small the Germans never saw it, and so devastating it allowed her to kill SS officers without a sound. She didn't fight in the forests, didn't plant bombs, didn't fire a single shot. She changed blood. One switch, one signature, and the German medical system killed its own men for her. By the end of the war, 21 SS officers were dead, each death ruled natural, each one hiding a truth the archives never wanted to confront. If you stay with this story, you'll understand the part of World War II almost nobody talks about, how a single nurse, with no weapon and no army behind her, exposed a weakness so deep it could have altered the war's machinery itself. This is the secret the textbooks left out, and the reason her name was erased. In 1943, Warsaw was no longer a city. It was a controlled environment, an occupied organism, where every street, every building, every breath belonged to the Reich. And at the center of it stood the one place the Germans believed was immune to sabotage, their military hospital. 3 floors of white walls, disinfectant and paperwork. A building designed to function with machine precision, because precision meant survival. If the Eastern Front was going to keep bleeding men, this place had to keep feeding them back. The Germans trusted their system. They trusted their charts, their blood records, their procedures, and above all, they trusted the Polish nurses who staffed the night shifts, young, fluent, obedient, trained in modern medicine. To them, these women were tools, necessary, replaceable, safe. Janina Nowak fit their expectations perfectly. 24. Top marks in nursing school. Flawless German. No political ties. No reason to draw attention. They saw her as harmless, which meant they never saw what she saw. A flaw that wasn't written in any manual, a blind spot created by their own confidence, a small gap between protocol and reality, wide enough for a quiet, invisible war. Every night she walked those corridors, the dim lights, the metal trays, the clipped footsteps of German officers. She learned the rhythm of the hospital, the way a saboteur learns a bridge. Which forms were checked, which weren't, who reread signatures, who never bothered, where the records aligned, and where they didn't. And slowly, silently, she realized something the Nazis never considered. A system built to save lives can be turned, with enough knowledge and enough nerve, into a system that takes them. The flaw Janina discovered wasn't dramatic. That was the point. There was no missing lock, no broken guard post, no corrupt officer taking bribes. There was only procedure. Every wounded soldier arrived with a chart clipped to the foot of his bed. Name, rank, injury, and, in neat German handwriting, one small line that mattered more than all the others: blood type. The system depended on speed. Men bled faster than doctors could think, so the Germans simplified the process. The chart was truth. The nurse confirmed it. The blood was hung. The form was signed. 2 signatures meant safety. That was the theory. What the system never questioned was intent. Janina had been trained to prevent transfusion errors, to treat them as rare, catastrophic accidents. She knew exactly what happened when incompatible blood entered the body. The immune system didn't hesitate. It attacked. Red cells ruptured. Organs failed. Shock followed. In a clean hospital, doctors might recognize the reaction in time. But this wasn't a clean hospital. This was 1943. A war hospital flooded with men from the Eastern Front. Infected wounds, internal bleeding, delayed shock, untreated trauma. Death was expected. Death was normal. A transfusion reaction didn't stand out. It blended in. Janina understood something crucial before she ever acted. If the system already expects men to die, it stops asking why. So she waited. For months, she did nothing. Perfect attendance, perfect performance, no deviations. She learned which doctors never double-checked, which signatures were rubber stamps, which hours of the night supervision thinned to almost nothing. Only when she was certain, when she had mapped the system completely, did she make the first switch. One chart, one bag of blood, one signature, and the hospital, exactly as designed, did the rest. The death was recorded as a complication. The file was closed. The system moved on, and Janina knew, with absolute clarity, that she had found a way to kill, that the Reich would never know how to look for. The first man Janina chose was not important. That was deliberate. He wasn't a famous officer. He wasn't a symbol. He was a test. An SS officer evacuated from the Eastern Front with shrapnel in his abdomen. His chart listed his blood type in clear ink. His surgery had gone well. His chances of survival were high. Janina changed one detail. Nothing about the ward reacted. No alarm. No raised voices. The drip flowed. The signature was signed. By morning, the officer was dead. The doctors blamed infection. The paperwork followed procedure. The body was sealed and sent west. And nothing else happened. That silence was more revealing than any investigation. It told her exactly how much death the system could absorb without noticing. She waited, not days, weeks. She needed to know whether the hospital would look backward, whether anyone would re-examine the file, whether patterns would be questioned. They weren't. Only then did she choose the second name. This one mattered. His service record mentioned units assigned to camp security, transfers to places that didn't appear on maps for long, the kind of postings that left no witnesses. His blood type was different. So was the mistake. The reaction was faster, violent, unmistakable. The doctors wrote allergic reaction. They shook their heads. They moved on. After that, Janina understood the real rule of the system. As long as deaths appear random, no one searches for intention. She imposed discipline on herself. Never two deaths close together. Never the same mismatch twice. Never lower-ranking soldiers who might invite questions. And never, under any circumstances, someone she felt uncertain about. Each switch required the same cold calculation. Not hatred, not anger. Risk. Between the killings, she remained the perfect nurse. Gentle hands, precise notes, a calm voice. When men woke, screaming from surgery. At night, alone in her apartment, the weight arrived. She replayed the moments she could not erase. The confusion in their eyes, the sudden understanding that something had gone wrong. But she did not stop, because every time she considered it, another train arrived from the front. Another uniform entered her ward. Another file confirmed what those men would do if they walked out alive. And slowly, death by death, Janina crossed a line she could never step back over. Not because she lost control, but because she had learned how completely the system could be trusted to hide what she was doing. By mid-1943, the hospital was still functioning, but the math was no longer clean. No one noticed a pattern. Not consciously. Not yet. What they noticed were numbers. The mortality rate in the surgical recovery ward had climbed. Not dramatically, just enough to sit outside the acceptable margin. 7% higher than expected. In any other year, in any other hospital, it would have been ignored. But this was the Eastern Front, bleeding men faster than Germany could replace them. Every officer mattered. Every death required explanation. Berlin demanded reports. The response was automatic, an audit. A German medical administrator arrived with a briefcase and a checklist. He wasn't looking for sabotage. That possibility didn't fit the model. He was looking for inefficiency. He reviewed charts, compared outcomes, questioned doctors, measured refrigerator temperatures in the blood storage room. At one point, he placed several files side by side. Men who had died after showing similar symptoms. He was close enough to feel it, but not close enough to see it, because the system trained him to assume accidents, not intent. He concluded the deaths were caused by contaminated plasma from a supplier under strain. The solution was procedural, not investigative. New suppliers, new labels, more paperwork. The audit closed. For Janina, it was a warning. The system had not found her, but it had tightened. Transfusions now required secondary verification. 2 nurses, 2 signatures. In theory, it ended her operation. In reality, it revealed something else. The second nurse, assigned to verify her work, was older, Polish, and exhausted. She glanced at the chart, signed, moved on. She never asked questions. They never spoke about it. But Janina understood immediately. She was no longer alone. The risk doubled. So did the cover. From that point on, every form bore proof that protocol had been followed. If an investigation came, it would point not to an individual, but to a system that had failed collectively. Still, the pressure grew. The Gestapo began appearing in the building more often, ostensibly for inspections, really to remind the Polish staff that obedience was being watched. Nurses disappeared for smaller offenses than murder. Rumors spread faster than certainty. Janina adjusted. Fewer targets, longer gaps, more patience. But she also understood something irreversible. Once a system begins correcting itself, it is only a matter of time before the flaw disappears. She didn't know how much time she had left, only that the war was changing, and that the men now arriving in her ward were no longer just soldiers. They were administrators, commandants, architects, and if she was going to act again, the margin for error was almost gone. By late 1943, the men arriving at the hospital had changed. They were no longer junior officers pulled from the front. They were administrators, commandants, men whose names appeared in reports, not casualty lists. These patients did not scream through the night from pain alone. They spoke calmly. They asked about recovery timelines. They expected to return to their desks, and their files told Janina exactly what those desks were used for. She began reading more carefully than ever, not just rank and unit, but postings, transfers, administrative roles hidden behind neutral language. Logistics is Iziyut, security coordination, it's did do, camp oversight. With did time, words that meant trains, schedules, selections. One of the men was barely 30, educated, polite. He spoke to Janina as if she were an equal, thanked her for her work, asked about her family. His file showed service at a camp whose name never appeared in newspapers. Another was older, careful with his words. A former civilian professional pulled into the SS for organizational efficiency. End quote. He spoke about his children, about how the war had disrupted everything. None of this made the decision easier, but it clarified it. Janina stopped asking whether these men looked like killers. She focused only on what would happen if they walked out alive. At the same time, the hospital was becoming more dangerous. Supervision increased. Security patrols tightened. Every unexplained death drew closer attention than the last. Janina adapted again. She stopped acting when patients were most vulnerable. Instead, she waited until recovery. A man who dies 2 days after surgery is expected. A man who collapses after 10 days of steady improvement is tragedy, but still plausible. She adjusted quantities. Smaller mismatches. Delayed reactions. Deaths that unfolded slowly, that fit neatly into charts already crowded with complications. The work became heavier. She slept less. Her hands shook before procedures. She lost weight that could not be explained by rationing alone. Still, she did not stop, because the alternative was to watch men she knew would return to mass murder walk out of the hospital healed by her own hands. By the end of the year, Janina understood the reality of her position. The system was closing. The targets were becoming more important, and the cost of continuing was rising toward something she could no longer calculate. If she acted again, it would have to be precise, final, and likely irreversible, because now, if the system noticed, it wouldn't correct itself. It would look for a person, and if it found her, there would be no paperwork left to hide behind. The man who arrived in early 1944 was different from all the others, not because of his injuries. Those were minor, recoverable. He was different because his name carried weight. An SS officer whose medical updates were sent directly to Berlin, a former camp administrator, a man who had never touched a rifle, yet had signed orders that erased entire transports. If he left the hospital alive, he would return to a desk where death was scheduled, not improvised. Janina knew immediately. This was the last kind of target she could ever reach. But killing him meant breaking her own rules. His room was monitored, his chart reviewed daily. Security officers checked in at fixed intervals. There was no margin. For days, she watched, mapped patrol times, noted when supervision slipped, not disappeared, just thinned. She found one gap, a routine, predictable, human. The night officer always completed his rounds early, then disappeared for a cigarette. A window, short, enough. On the night she acted, Janina didn't rush. She prepared the transfusion exactly as required, logged the procedure, signed the form. The blood was wrong. The reaction was immediate, faster than she expected. His body recognized the intrusion and rejected it with violence. Lungs tightening, pulse racing, confusion setting in. She should have left. That had always been the rule. Instead, she stayed. She watched his eyes search the room, then stop on her. Recognition arrived not as understanding, but as certainty. This was not an accident, and in that moment, Janina made the first emotional decision of her entire operation. She leaned in and spoke. Only one sentence. Quiet. Unnecessary. A release. If he had survived long enough to speak, everything would have ended there. He didn't. Minutes later, the ward filled with movement. Doctors, orderlies, questions. Janina stood among them, silent, precise, exhausted. The death triggered what she had avoided for 2 years. Not an audit, not paperwork, an investigation. Within hours, Gestapo officers sealed the ward. Files were pulled. Interviews began. This time, the system wasn't looking for mistakes. It was looking for intent. Janina understood something with perfect clarity. The flaw she had lived inside was closing. And this time, it was closing with her still inside it. The investigation did not begin with accusations. That came later. First came questions. Repetitive, methodical, designed to exhaust rather than enlighten. Janina was questioned for hours at a time. Every shift, every patient, every transfusion. She answered calmly, not because she was fearless, but because she had learned the most effective defense the system itself provided. Tell the truth that fits the paperwork. Every signature was hers. Every procedure followed protocol. Every step aligned with regulations tightened months earlier. The autopsy confirmed what the doctors already suspected. The officer had died from a hemolytic reaction caused by incompatible blood. That single fact changed everything. Because incompatible transfusions were not supposed to happen anymore. The Gestapo expanded the inquiry. They pulled older files, compared symptoms, searched for patterns, and for the first time, Janina watched the system turn its full weight inward. But the system was too damaged to indict itself. Years of war had fractured the records. Blood bank logs were incomplete. Shift schedules had been altered after the fact to cover shortages. Patient files were missing entire sections, lost during evacuations and emergency admissions. The data could not support a conclusion, and when a system cannot find the truth, it looks for someone expendable. 2 Polish blood bank workers were arrested. Men with no authority, no protection, no leverage. They were accused of mislabeling blood units, of negligence, of sabotage. The trial lasted less than a day. The sentence was execution. Janina watched them disappear and understood, finally, what she had done. Not to the SS officers, to the system. It had absorbed her actions, corrected itself, and redirected the cost downward, exactly as it was designed to do. After that, the flaw was sealed. Every transfusion required German approval. Every blood unit was tracked end to end. Gestapo informants were embedded among the staff. Janina's war ended not with discovery, but with redundancy. She continued working at the hospital through the summer of 1944. She treated wounded men. She followed orders. She killed no one. When Warsaw was liberated in early 1945, she did not step forward. There were no confessions, no medals. She left quietly. For the next 40 years, she told no one. Not her husband, not her children, not the new authorities who documented resistance stories and would have reshaped hers into propaganda because she understood something history prefers not to. What she had done only made sense in a world that no longer existed. Decades later, the truth surfaced by accident. An aging nurse, a dying confession, a historian willing to listen. The evidence was enough to confirm the story, but not enough to make it comfortable. Medical ethicists hesitated. Editors declined. Institutions argued. The story was published once, quietly, and then buried again. Janina Nowak died without recognition. The men she killed remain listed as casualties of war. The men executed in her place remain nameless. And the final truth of her story, the reason it still unsettles us, is this. The most effective resistance is often invisible. It does not end with victory. And it leaves behind people history does not know how to forgive. Not heroes, not villains, just individuals who found a flaw in a system built for death and paid the price for using it.